I apologize in advance for the noise. That's my computer running, because what this is essentially the same thing that I did last week when I talked to you guys about what Big said about the word objective. This is a response to another viewer by the name of Michael Conway. 200 comments, 200 plus comments across two videos. One on my Molyneux video, which went up by 130, and another 70 on the most recent vid. This time about free will and determinism. So I'm gonna read the comments again and try and comment back, refute them. Also just communicate my ideas. So Michael, I'm sorry, but you didn't actually want to continue the discussion, and I offered to do it over Skype and you said no. And that's fine, whatever, you have shit to do, but you can watch a video. So I'll have my argument here, vocalized so that you can understand better, because as I keep saying, text is a horrible, 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 wretched, pathetic medium for interacting about this stuff. Okay? I misinterpret people through text, everyone does, and especially when the definitions have to be so technical. So this is for sure, this should elucidate the matter, at least my thoughts on it. So Michael was basically saying that, I'm going to inform people, right? Michael was basically saying that free will and determinism, mutually exclusive concepts, and he's a Stefan Molyneux fan and stuff, and he was saying they're mutually exclusive concepts, and you can't have pure determinism and you can't have pure free will. So that isn't true, demonstrably untrue, and well, let's dig in. So I'm going to skip some of this stuff. A lot of these comments didn't even have anything to do with the topic. I'm just getting down to the brunt of the topic, because for those of you who don't know, one of the fundamental, just whenever I do moral reasoning, ever, any opinion I have, determinism, hard determinism, is what exists in the universe, more or less. There's also randomness, and I'm going to explain what that actually means, but I'm a compatibilist, essentially. Free will, the question of free will and choice has nothing to do with whether or not the universe is deterministic. So he says, because morality is all about judging... Wait, no, that's not what he said. Oh wait, no, it is what he said. Because morality is all about... I'm actually going to do a different voice for you, Michael, just so that people can distinguish between my voice, my comments, and the comments that you made. Because morality is all about judging choices, if a man murders another man and there is no way he could have ever possibly done anything differently, how can you possibly blame him? He had no choice. The same is true for good deeds. If it couldn't have ever been any different, there is no moral component. What is simply is. It's not a good deed if you are forced to do it with a gun to your head. Where physics is about analyzing cause and effect, morality is about analyzing choice. So first of all, he did this over two comments. One thing, just pointing out, if you're going to write comments, just write everything in a huge essay so that I can read it. Don't put one comment and then another, because as soon as I read the first comment, I'm going to start responding to it, and then the second one comes in, and the second one has some other points, and all of a sudden the entire trail of the discussion just got derailed because you decided to post two comments. It just derails the whole thing. Or better yet, just don't discuss things on YouTube comments like this. If you have some of this stuff, I am very certain of some of my views. If you want to debate them, I am happy to do it through voice over Skype. And if it's going to be a big discussion, and it probably is, that's the best way to do it. Don't even attempt the stuff that this guy did. I'm going to do everything at all costs to try and avoid shit like this in the future, because it's just a waste of time. And every few minutes I'm checking back on my YouTube thing to find out what your comments... Anyway, so what he's saying is, without choice, you can't, so you basically, without choice, what is simply is. You can't use reality to justify morality, which is Hume's law in a nutshell. Yeah, you can't do that. I mean, that's perfect. You're not making some conclusion, Michael, here. You're just saying, you're restating Hume's law. What is simply is. What is says nothing about how things should be. How things should be oughts and should statements are all predicated on some fundamental axiom of morality that is completely arbitrary. So it's not predicated on anything in reality. That is absolutely true. And yes, physics is all about analyzing cause and effect, and morality is all about analyzing choice. And yes, this also means that choice and free will do not exist in a tangible, physical, real sense. Maybe that's the issue with you Molyneux Steph-bots. I'm going to call you guys Steph-bots. Maybe that's the issue with you guys, is that you think choice and free will and all this stuff are like real things that exist in the world. And maybe that's why you have the view that you do, but they don't exist in the world. Not in the same way that matter and energy does. Not in the same way that causality does. I'll get to that later on, but... So my response to him is, well, yeah, the guy who murdered can't be blamed. However, we can recognize his nature as a problem society faces and think about how to get rid of the problem. The point isn't to put blame solely on him and realize that there are a myriad of environmental and genetic factors in play that should be considered. Again, the point of morality isn't really to blame people, right? What's the point of morality? Well, it's arbitrary. Again, it's any arbitrary should statement. The point of morality can be anything. My axiom is that the point of morality is to improve society. You can accept that or deny that, but you have your own axiom of morality, which says that it's about blaming people, or non-people. And blaming people can be useful when helping society, but the point is whether to blame or not to blame is entirely arbitrary. It's not something that follows from choice. But there is no choice. How can we collectively or individually choose to change the societal conditions that the man suffers under? If there is no cause and effect, how can we affect change, collectively or individually? Okay, so you're preaching right now. Affecting, creating, choosing to initiate change requires both free will and determinism. Here's an interesting thought experiment tangent. If you remove the illusionary dimension time, what meaning does cause and effect or choice retain? I don't know what you're talking about in that last comment. A lot of this stuff I had no idea what you were saying. I think you're assuming that free will is well defined as you're speaking. And the whole point here is that it's not a well-defined concept, not in the way that you mean it. It is not... I mean, you can define it well, but it can't ever be a definition that describes decisions in the same way, that describes events in the same way that causality does. Causality is simple. There is a reason or there's no reason, or there's some degree of reason. Free will has nothing to do with that, right? But so why does it try to describe things on a metaphysical level as well? Free will is a moral concept, not a concept of reality the way that it is. Anyway, the point is, I'll just continue. So I said, well, I don't see your problem. Our choices are predetermined, but that doesn't mean we know how they're determined. Is your concern that if we have determinism only, then why try to change things for the better since we can't change our destiny? I was trying to figure out what you were saying because I had no clue, because you started talking about affecting, creating, like... If your problem was that morality becomes arbitrary, then that shouldn't be your problem. Yes, morality is arbitrary. Just deal with it. That's just how it is. Like, I'm sorry if that's an uncomfortable concept, but that's how it is. But your every single motion, bead of sweat, inner consciousness, and passing through would be predetermined for every instant of your life. No room for choice. Zero, zip, nada. What consequences, knowledge, or ignorance of the future? How can an automatic script even be said to think or experience? Does a record player's song heed itself played to stop to consider its own existence? Does it argue about reality? Who is there to hear your discourse? Okay, the reason those things don't do that is because they aren't as complex as we are. Being conscious is just something that comes with complexity. Like that's what we understand, from information theory and biology, is that as a program, a machine becomes more and more complex, it will eventually begin to resemble something that is conscious. And if you look at the objects on planet Earth right now, the most complex object on Earth remains the human brain. It is the most complex thing. It has the most intermoving parts that have, separate functions. You're acting as if I don't understand what determinism implies. Yes, I understand that there's no choice. Absolutely no choice. Even what I'm doing now isn't a choice. It's something that is predetermined by my emotions and shit. Me making this video. But again, that has nothing to do with morality. That has, that's just a statement of fact. Morality has nothing to do with statements of fact. Morality isn't predicated on facts. At the end of the day, it's predicated on an arbitrary axiom. An arbitrary axiom that assigns, good and bad to different states of being for people in the world. A society where everyone is suffering is arbitrarily bad, and a society where everyone is happy is arbitrarily good, right? This is just an arbitrary classification. There's no tangible physical logic to it. In other words, is what Big was saying in the other. This is what Big was saying in the other video. He was saying that, well, then morality doesn't exist. Yeah, I guess you could say that morality doesn't exist. I still think it does exist. It just exists in a different sense. Not everything has to exist as a tangible object of reality. Anyway, my motion. So I say, yeah, every single motion is predetermined, but you know the future. It doesn't undermine choice at all. The reason it doesn't undermine choice, and I didn't really explain this, because choice is redefined to be something different. That's what the compatibilists do. They redefine choice, or they redefine free will. And this is what I said, and you said that, and your response to that, and I'll probably get to that point, is that you can redefine it, but the original concept is still there. Yes, but my point is you have to redefine it because the original concept literally doesn't make sense as a concept. It literally doesn't make sense. You can't show it or demonstrate it or talk about it or discuss it. You can't define it. Any attempts to do that will be met with contradictions. They will either lead to determinism or, randomness. If you try to talk about free will, you will inevitably not be talking about free will. You will inevitably be in a situation where it's either a deterministic thing or a random thing. Oh, and then this was over a few days, and then he's like, I slept on it. Oh my god. Okay, so one thing to note about Michael is he makes very long comments. I'm not even gonna read all of this, because at this point he was saying how, he was saying that I was affirming the consequent and moving the goalpost, and just, no. I'm not gonna read all that, because it's not interesting and it's not accurate. Again, we don't have the ability to change the predetermined future, but so what? Where do you make the logical leap that morality doesn't exist? We don't hold people accountable for their actions because they made a choice. We hold them accountable because we want them to change their ways. My desire to change things or encourage things to change is itself predetermined. But again, so what? Does that mean that it's invalid? Does that mean that I won't change things? It means I can't deviate from the path that determinism has set out for me, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't try to do things, right? Because maybe me trying to do things is what creates the path in the first place. So then he links some article, which doesn't matter, and then he says, oh my god, these are massive comments. Okay, but I'm going to read this one. This is a long one, but I'm going to read it. Based on some approaches discussed in the article... Oh, he's referencing the article, never mind. Okay, yeah, I remember. The article was basically summarizing what free will and determinism were. I skimmed it, by the way. Based on some of the approaches discussed in the article, I think, just a guess, that you may be drawing a distinction between freedom of will and freedom of action, which means that while you are applying assuming cause and effect determinism for physical actions, you are segregating the realms of thoughts, desires, wants, human will into a special corner where cause and effect no longer hold absolute authority. No, I'm not doing this. Cause and effect always works, always. All the time. I'm never segregating it into a world. I'm thinking outside the box. There's no, you think that it's like I'm confined in this space and I'm saying, well, causality works, all the time is what I'm saying, but I'm actually, in what I'm doing, I'm saying causality only works this much, and then there's a tiny weeny little bit left for choice and freedom of will. That's what you think I'm saying. Right? That's my interpretation of what you just said there. And that I'm sort of cherry-picking, because that's what you accused me of, Michael, was cherry-picking, was saying that, I'm saying that cause and effect works all the time, but I'm still saying free will exists. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm not confined in this space, you see. there's this space where cause and effect works all the time, and then there's a new space way out here. A new, totally new space that has nothing to do with this other space, where where free will and choice, all these things actually make sense. And this new space has absolutely nothing to do with reality as it is. So then he starts saying that I'm not actually, so yeah, he's saying essentially what I said, that I'm not actually, I'm saying cause and effect is what I believe in, but I'm not actually taking it to its furthest implications. Yeah, that isn't true. You know, emphasize to you, Michael, that that isn't true. I am fully on board with the idea of total cause and effect. The universe isn't actually totally cause and effect, but it's not free will either. It's this other thing called quantum randomness, which I'll get to later. So yeah, that's what I say. I said I am taking determinism to its absolute conclusions. Every human action is predetermined. I'm not putting thoughts into a special corner. I don't see why you insist that choices are required for morality or ethics to exist. Again, I'm not putting morality and ethics into a corner. I'm just changing the experiment completely. I'm saying there's this realm where cause and effect, and there's this other realm where choice and ethics exist. And this is an arbitrarily defined realm. So he says, because something cannot be right or wrong, good or bad, if there is no choice in a matter. Without the assumption of choice, there is no moral component. If there is no power to change the outcome, there is no choice. You wouldn't say the man is wrong for being born stupid. He had zero choice in the matter. You would say the man is wrong for promoting opinions about the subject that he refuses to research. He chooses his ignorance. Okay. You wouldn't say the man is wrong for being born stupid. You wouldn't say the man is wrong at all. You would say the situation is bad. The universe is bad for having the initial conditions set up exactly in such a way that history ensues and causes this man to be born stupid. That's what you would say. You know, that's the thing you would say. You wouldn't assign any kind of blame to the individual. You know, you wouldn't assign it, and that's sort of what you get to as you sort of try to look at, whatever, I'm just gonna read what he keeps saying. So I say, okay, well, I don't agree with this. How do you define good and bad? It says, like, it doesn't matter how I define them. They are subjective. We aren't talking about whether the extra rain this year was good for crop yields and morality. We are talking about human actions according to some normative standard or another. Actions are predicated on choice. Without choice, there is no way to link human actions to either blame or accolade or any kind of moral verdict. Without choice, there's no moral appraisal. Here's the thing. Actions have to be caused by something. You're saying that they're caused by choices. But what are choices caused by? If choices aren't caused by anything, then choices are random. If choices are random, then free will is just randomness. And there's no way that you want free will to just be randomness, because randomness suggests even less control than determinism. But if choices are caused by something, you know, like certain ideas, instincts, or the way the brain is wired, and are determined entirely by how the brain is wired and how the brain works as a very complex computer whose complexity is beyond your comprehension, then everything makes sense. Really, truly, everything does make sense if you agree with that. And then you have a cause for action. That's the thing. It's about having causes. It's about having reasons for why things happen. If there's a reason for it, then it's causal. But if it doesn't have a reason for it, it's random. Where is the choice thing, though? It's like you think that there's this third element, choice, that is neither caused and it's neither random nor is it caused, but it also describes the way reality is. You know, this is the problem with the free will thing, is that free will is treated as a descriptive idea. That it's an idea that describes reality. It's not an idea that describes morality. It's not an idea that ascribes moral values to things. It's an idea that ascribes real values to things. You know, like physical parameters, energy. But it can't be a real phenomenon because a real phenomena can either be causal or totally uncausal, and somewhere in between. But there's no third option, right? There's no like second dimension in this question. Anyway, so I say, So he defines good and right and wrong, good and bad behavior based on something he looked up in a dictionary, and I say don't look in the dictionary. This is actually one of the stupidest things that like Molyneux is freaking indoctrinated people with, is this idea that the dictionary somehow is where we go to learn about words, as if the dictionary has any fucking clue where you learned a certain word. I did not learn any of the words that I'm using from a dictionary. I learned them from things like Wikipedia, or by reading books, or heck, by talking to people. You know, the dictionary is just a group of people, the group of people, some organization that creates the dictionary. It's just their opinion on what the word means based on how it's used by the public. It's not how the word actually means. This is a whole linguistics issue, but words are defined by how they're used, not by what they actually mean. Without choice, discussion of good or bad is nonsense. The rock collided with the other rock in a good way. It has no meaning, not even a subjective one. Good, subjective appraisal, which is the opposite of bad. Bad, subjective appraisal, which is the opposite of good. And I'm saying, okay, and I'm saying you can easily assign an arbitrary value to a rock colliding with another rock. You can say something like, sure, it has meaning. It's an arbitrary distinction between some physical states and others. For example, a large, beautiful mountain is intrinsically a good state. An empty plain of rocks is intrinsically a bad state. Easy peasy. I could say that. Having a mountain around is intrinsically better. Having no mountain is intrinsically good. Then he says he learned plenty of words from the dictionary. You don't like dictionary definitions because you like to pretend that we can change the definition and still be talking about the same thing. That's a con. rationalwiki.org/wiki equivocation. Jesus Christ. So, people who aren't Steph bots, like, I know Brian agrees with me on this, and he's a libertarian, for God's sakes, and I know he doesn't even agree on this dictionary thing. Like, this dictionary thing is really, really freaking stupid. Talk to any linguist, seriously. The dictionary is not where you go to learn words. Okay? I'm not changing any definitions, I'm using the definitions that are based on how I heard the words, that's it. Now, certainly that's predicated on my experience, but the weird thing is I like how you accuse me of things here, Michael. You're the same guy that tries to point out how you're probably wrong and you're making a guess and an assumption. I mean, if you're the one who's in the dark about what I stand for, why is it that you're so ready to accuse me of doing certain things and being a certain way if you admit to not actually knowing why I believe in certain things? I don't change dictionary definitions to suit my needs. I look at the definitions that people use, and I point out flaws in those definitions, or things that don't make sense. And the reason I don't like looking at the dictionary in general is because I know for a fact that that's not how you learned the word. I know for a fact, Michael, that you did not learn the word morality by reading the dictionary. I know that. Because that's impractical. Nobody does that. Nobody learns great quantities of words by looking at the dictionary. Now, you may have... Now, if you heard how a word was used and then looked it up, that's different, because the way the word is used is already in your memory. So you actually learned the word by first hearing it. The dictionary just gave you a bigger idea of what it means, but you didn't learn it by reading the dictionary. You learned it by hearing it. Learning words, you learn them by hearing them, not by whatever. Like, this is just more nonsense. Good and bad have nothing to do with physical states. They describe not plasma, liquid, solid, gas, whatever. They don't refer to how matter behaves in reality, but refer to how we feel about things, how we associate our internal chemical events, emotions with external events in the physical world. That's the same thing. These are my emotions about a certain state of matter. I shouldn't say you like to, that's a fallacious application of motive on my part. People do things they hate doing for most of their lives? I don't even know what that's referencing. See, here's the problem. He was making... every time that he would post a comment, I would see it in the YouTube update thing, and I would immediately post a reply. And as I'm posting my reply, he would post like 2 more comments, because he can't just write everything in one comment for some reason. And then, the comment I made, he might reply to that comment later, and I'm not actually replying to all of his points because he separated them into several comments. It's just a freaking mess. Hence why I decided to make the video. And plus, it's something to make a video about. So again, I'm like, yeah, good and bad are arbitrary classifications of states based on human emotions. What's the problem? You're saying they don't refer to how states actually are, they refer to how we feel about things. But what do you mean how we feel about things? They refer to how we feel about states, right? They refer to how we feel about certain plasma, liquids, solids, gases, whatever. Or you say that how we feel about things, what are things? They don't refer to how matter behaves in reality, but instead refer to how we feel about things. What do you mean by things? Things are states of matter, physical states. They literally refer to how we feel about physical states. If that's not what they're referring to, then by all means tell me what they're referring to. Because anywhere I've seen people use the word good and bad, they're always referring to how they feel about a certain physical state, about a certain state of being. Oh god, it's another long one. Okay, so if we change the definitions of good and bad, or neural association of certain internal chemical reactions, emotions with murder, for instance, does not change. Only the words we're using changes. Similarly, we don't magically begin associating sense of wrong with non-chosen causal reaction, but just because we are using a different word. The general set of emotions one feels when losing a wallet remains different from the general set of emotions that one feels when they have been robbed by a malicious force. Even if we're using the same word for both situations, changing the word does not change the general set of emotions that are associated with the other event. Well, first of all, those events are not the same, because in one you just lose it, you don't know how. The other one, it's stolen from you. But again, what do you mean it doesn't change how we feel about it? Knowing that it's inevitable doesn't change how we feel about it? That's not true at all. Because when someone murders, you hear about someone who murders someone, and sure, you might feel bad, but let's say you learn more about the murderer, and you learn that a whole bunch of things. Maybe they did it for the greater good, maybe they had a really rough childhood, or maybe they have some kind of genetic predisposition toward murder. I mean, it doesn't matter what you learn, but you learn all the factors that are the causes to why they made that choice, right? And once you learn all that, you do feel differently about that. I've yet to meet a person who doesn't change whose emotional reaction to an event doesn't change once they learn more about the reasons why the event took place. I think every single person's emotions towards an event changes once they learn about the reasons why people do things. Because I think the other way, if you don't know the reasons, you just sort of assume the worst, that the reason he's a murderer is because he's just a bad guy. And, that's just usually, I mean, even if that's accurate, that's still a reason, though, right? So I say, yes, and perhaps certain emotional associations aren't good reactions to have because they make us behave irrationally. Losing your wallet is bad, losing your wallet to a malicious force is worse, but in both cases I am describing states. I can say, at least for myself, that I don't tend to blame people for their actions as much as most people. And whenever I do begin to blame people by learning more about their situation and learning the causal chain, I realize it's the situation itself that is unfortunate, not the person, which is just the thing that I just said, right? As you learn more about it, you tend to forgive the other side. And here he goes on about his 3 plus I dimension thing. I think he means 3 plus 1, where the 1 represents time. I'm not sure what it's even referring to. There's a whole religion called Buddhism. My position is I cannot make a rationally consistent argument against either free will or determinism. Both concepts are mutually exclusive of each other, yet I experience both every day. My 3 plus I dimensions of human perception. This paradox can exist in my mind as a bit of self-referential code written on my gray matter substrate. Perhaps the functions of 2 parallel infinite lines on some other physical impossibility, if you will. But in physical reality, there can be no paradox. So I don't know what you mean by that. Oh, okay, so hold on. And at the end, I'm skimming this because this guy makes really long comments. And yet, subjective human perception actually indicates the only configuration that is logically impossible. In terms of human experience, both appear to be valid at the same time. We experience both. We are all quite literally insane. Maybe you're insane, buddy. I definitely am not insane. So, okay, we could experience both, but that doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. In fact, if we experience both, then they're by definition not mutually exclusive. So why you say that they're mutually exclusive, or he said this in the other 130 plus comments or whatever. So yeah, I said it makes sense to me, accept determinism, then redefine free will not to be mutually exclusive with determinism. Done. Redefining free will does not change the original concept of free will that is mutually exclusive of causality. The original concept is there for anyone to experience and ponder. We could just as easily accept free will as an absolute and then redefine causality not to be mutually exclusive of free will. That's basically what Thomas Aquinas did. Both are fallacies. Okay, you can't... The original concept is not there because the original concept doesn't make sense. You think it does. You think it does because you are convinced that it does. I don't know why, because you learned about free will or you think you experience it. But I'm telling you that your thoughts, the very idea of free will is a delusion within your brain. Like, I can't say this in a way that's not insulting, I guess, but it literally is a delusion that your brain has concocted because it can't explain its own, its own decisions. You literally are not complex enough to be able to predict, to have the predictable capacity to predict what a human being will do. A human being is an incredibly complex machine. But just because it's an incredibly complex machine does not mean that determinism flew out the window and we got this new fancy free will thing out of nowhere. And paradoxes not existing in reality is problematic as well, because there's a shit ton of them throughout math and physics, and so what does it mean to say that they don't exist? I mean, you could say they don't exist in reality. What is reality then? Because from human perception's perspective, they do exist. I mean, have you heard of the Banach-Tarski paradox, for Christ's sake? They literally do exist insofar as our understanding of reality is. And reality, I had a whole debate about this, but reality doesn't exist outside of our understanding of it. Or its existence outside of our understanding just doesn't matter. So asserting that we should somehow care about that these paradoxes can't happen, whatever. Like, the paradox thing is saying that this is some kind of paradox. I feel like this is not a straw man. It's like a straw man or a red herring or something. It's one of those logical fallacies. It's not something I'm doing at all. My terms are well defined. I'm just attacking the very definition of the word you're using. And you can't seem to figure that out. Maybe because I didn't actually say it explicitly. But at the same time, the thing that's working against me here is the fact that it's hard for us to question definitions that seem intuitive to us. And the idea of free will is intuitive to you. You think that it's a thing that you experience. You believe firmly that it's a thing you experience. I'm trying to convince you that it is not a thing that you actually experience. Not in that way. So yeah, and I'm like, yeah, but the original concept is stupid. You don't need to have morality so long as you accept morality as an arbitrary construct. And then he says, scientists don't change their theories to conform to their data mid-experiment. I have no idea what this is even referring to. Sure, you can say that morality is an arbitrary concept. It is! It still doesn't change people's emotional associations with discrete events. The right-wrong association dichotomy remains, regardless of what you call it. An event is just a state of being. Again, I don't know, you made this distinction before about how there's what we think about things, and then there's physical states. Well, what we think about things is just a physical state as well. It's just another kind of physical state. In fact, us thinking about anything is also a physical state. But us thinking about a thing, that thing is also a physical state. So associating right and wrong with, associating right-wrong dichotomy remains regardless of what you call it, associating right-wrong with things that happen is literally a physical state, just like anything else. Just like rocks, it's the same kind of physical state. And we have different set of general associations for what we perceive as chosen than for what we perceive as unchosen. It doesn't matter how you define morality, there is a perceived difference between choice and non-choice, and this difference engenders different emotions. How do you know that there's a perceived difference between choice and non-choice? How do you know that this perception isn't completely fallacious? How do you know? How do you know that this perceived difference between choice and non-choice is a valid thing? How do you know that it's not some huge delusion? I mean, people in the past had, you know, had a very perceived idea that God could be perceived, right? And they would argue forever, like, yeah, you can perceive God. You can perceive that everything in the universe has a cause. That's also just a huge delusion. And they use the same argument. It's like, well, where does morality come from if you don't perceive God? And this is what you're doing as well. You're saying, where does morality come from if we don't perceive choice? It's the same kind of thing, man. There is no difference between choice and non-choice. Not so far as reality is concerned. This perceived difference between choice and non-choice is the result of the fact that our brains are complex enough to figure out how a rock... Like, okay, this is hard to illustrate because I understand perfectly where the mistake is. It's like, we can predict the movements of a moving rock, right? Or a falling rock. It's very easy to predict because it's a very simple system. Once the system becomes more complex, once there's, you know, more than 3 rocks moving, or more than 3 particles moving, we no longer have the mathematical capacity to predict what happens. It's too complicated at that point. There's too many differential equations to figure out what actually goes on. But does that mean that the laws of physics stop applying and that causality stops working? No. Now keep applying, increasing the number of particles, and arrange them in a certain way, and what you will get is a human brain. You know, a human brain has millions of neurons. Neurons are made up of, I don't know, millions of particles. Add that all up, you have millions, quadrillions, billions of particles arranged in a certain way. The only thing that changed from the example where the one rock was falling to the example where you have a billion, quadrillion particles is that there's more particles, which means it's just more complicated. There's more equations that describe it. But does that mean that something fundamentally metaphysically changed about that situation? Hell no. At the very least, there's no reason to think it did. Just because you feel that it did, and I'm saying, well, just because you feel that it did doesn't mean that that's true or that you can prove that, right? In fact, it's quite conceivable that the only reason you think that something changed is because your brain literally can't comprehend that complexity. But it can comprehend the complexity of one moving rock. You know, try to imagine in your head, for the audience, try to imagine try to imagine a quadrillion particles interacting all at once. You can't do it, right? Like to you, a quadrillion is just an abstraction. You can't actually picture a quadrillion things, right? Like, try to picture a number of objects. Like, if it's more than, like, if the number's pretty high, you can't distinguish between the objects anymore. Like, this is a thing people do, you know, very large numbers or very large distances. We can understand them abstractly, but we can't picture them physically. We can't sense them. We can't, we don't have the IQ or the intelligence to literally perceive what they are and how they work. And that's literally what the brain is. It is something too complex for us to perceive. And the reason, as we know from information theory, the reason it's too complex for us to perceive is because it is what allows us to perceive other things. And you can't have a machine that is complex enough to perceive itself. That is not something that you can ever have in information theory. Any computer that can detect information, that can perceive things, will never have enough information to perceive itself, to perceive the mechanisms that go on in creating it. So I say, so then, and I go off topic. So he says perceived difference between choice and non-choice. So I say, so then maybe all emotional associates with events in which people perceive a choice in caps, in which people perceive a choice was made are all invalid. You know, anytime you start thinking about choices being made, maybe that's just erroneous thinking. And he says, you could just as easily pull the opposite out of your ass. All emotional associations with events where people perceive causality are invalid. I cannot make a rationally consistent argument for or against either assertion. The reason you can't seem to make one, Michael, is because you are assuming that freedom, free will, choice are well-defined ideas within reality, but they're not, as I'll get to. You can't pull the same out of your ass. Claiming the opposite contradicts causality, which we took as a fact. And he's like, it's easy by your method. You simply take free will as a fact and redefine causality such that it is not mutually exclusive of free will. You see how this is fallacious, but you do not see how it is just fallacious to do the opposite. You trust more in your perception of causality than of free will, so you favor it as the natural assumption over free will. Then you rationalize from there. Subjectivity speaking, however, your perception of free will is just as valid as your perception of causality. There is no reason to logically favor causality without time travel. There is no definite null hypothesis. Like, this is where I'm thinking, this is like has to be a definition problem on top of being a logical problem. Because I'm sure that you are deluded about the definition of free will, Michael, but I'm not sure what words, the definition of some of the words that you're using. The reason you can't take free will as a fact, because free will isn't a thing. It's not something you can detect. Point me to free will. Point me to something that has no cause, that isn't random either, because free will isn't randomness. If you assert that free will is just randomness, then fine, then there's free will, but it certainly doesn't affect human behavior, not based on how quantum mechanics works. Anyway, so I say, except that there's a huge number of reasons why we logically favor causality. Everything in physics is causal except for quantum mechanics, but let's not get into that. In fact, something can't be non-causal. The laws of physics operate causally. Free will, on the other hand, laws of classical mechanics operate causally. Quantum mechanics does not operate causally. Free will, on the other hand, is nowhere to be seen amongst particles and energy, so it appears as, to be an abstract concept representing human decision-making. Sure, there is a plethora of subjectively informed data supporting causality, all of science, but there is no data more convincing than watching thrown bottles shatter against a wall. And from my subjective human shell, the choice to throw the bottle is just as real to me as the effect of shattering the glass. How do you know that your choice to throw the bottle is real to you? How do you know it's real to you, but why do you put it in the same category as this causal stuff? How do you know that it's real? It feels real to you. That's what you're saying, is that it feels real to you, but how do you know that it's a real choice? How do you know that it's a choice? Just because it feels real doesn't mean that it's a real choice, right? To elevate one experience over the other is to pretend that one is informed by something other than subjective perception. Furthermore, the same logic that holds science together, all that causal data, also holds that our perception of causality and our perception of choice cannot both accurately reflect what is going on in reality. Again, how do you know that our perceptions of choice aren't complete fabrications, illusions that we have erroneously concocted as a way of trying to figure out what's going on in reality? I mean, the reason you think it's a paradox, but the reason it's a paradox is because you believe that choice is a thing. The paradox literally goes away once you understand that choice is a erroneous. The choice is a complete illusion. And once you realize that choice is a complete illusion, cause and effect is the only thing left, then it explains reality perfectly. Except for when randomness goes in. So he says, to choose free will over determinism is an arbitrary choice because all the perceptions that inform either one are arbitrary perceptions. 1,000 pages of bad, subjective, adulterated data is no more valid or invalid than one page of equally subjective but opposite data. Oh my god. I didn't even actually, please forgive use of the word choose. I didn't actually notice this when I was replying to him. 1,000 pages of bad, subjective, adulterated data is no more valid or invalid than one page of... So you're saying that 1,000 pages... You're referring to scientific pages, right? Let me get this absolutely clear. Are you saying here that 1,000 pages of scientific data, subjectively informed data supporting causality or whatever, is no more valid than one page of subjective data by some random person that feels that something is true? Do people seem to... Why do you people not respect scientists is what I want to ask. My whole objective thing was I was saying you need to have the consensus of scientists, or the consensus of scientists is where you want to start, right? And everyone hated that idea. It's like consensus of scientists does not mean something is true. So you all think that you're smarter than the scientists is essentially what you're saying. Because that's the thing I'm getting. You all think that you're so much smarter than the scientists. Here's the thing. What you guys believe doesn't matter. if you're not scientifically literate. You know, if you believe something that the scientific consensus doesn't, then you are wrong. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. If you're a scientist that doesn't agree with the scientific consensus, then maybe you have a point. Because if you're a scientist, then maybe you ran an experiment, and the reason you don't agree is because this is new evidence. But if you're just a lay person who watches YouTube videos and is new to this stuff and learning it by reading some books that other smarter people wrote, then you don't agree with what the consensus of scientists say, then you are wrong. I'm sorry, but that's how it is. You can't possibly consider yourself to be more correct than the scientists. Their consensus is a much higher value, has way more weight than what you think is true. And the majority of scientists believe in determinism. But they also believe in quantum randomness, and again, I'm going to explain that later, because there's this one big juicy comment where it'll make sense to explain quantum randomness to those who don't know. But holy shit, okay, the scientists, here's the thing, Michael, I don't think you know, but not a single scientist would ever believe the shit that you believe. Like, let me be absolutely clear, not a single person who has been through academia, who has a PhD, would ever believe the shit that you believe. I guarantee you they would never believe this. So where do you have this arrogance that you think that you are somehow more right than they are? That you have enough knowledge and enough information and a good enough understanding of reality that you are right and the consensus of scientists is all wrong. That is a profoundly arrogant, that is a very loud plane, sorry about that noise, I'm not going to do anything about that. That is a profoundly arrogant statement, and not something you can justify easily, and not something that anyone should take seriously. The consensus of scientists is, for all intents and purposes, what is true at any point in time. If you want to become a scientist and you want to prove the other scientists wrong, go ahead. That's fine. Fine by me. Go ahead. Try and prove the scientists wrong. Go become a physicist. Go get your PhD. Do it. But only then will I actually hold your opinion at the same level, at the same value that I hold theirs. Once you have the credential, you know, or once you at least have like a scientifically literate approach to this stuff. Because only then will your brain have enough experience with this stuff to make proper decisions. And you know what? I guarantee you, Michael, if you go and learn physics, you will not continue to believe this stuff. I guarantee you. I would bet my life on it. I would literally bet my life that you would not continue to believe this if you went and tried to become a physicist. Welcome to prove me wrong, my friend. Anyway, so here I go. Okay, so here's my approach. Regardless of how real your choices and free will feel to you does not make them real. They are not real whatsoever in the sense that you think they are. There are only two possible ways that matter can interact. Causally or randomly. Free will is neither. Free will posits that at some point in time a falling rock stops and makes a decision. It's a cultural delusion that exists because human beings are incapable of perceiving all the causal elements that determine their choices. Did you know that every word you say is actually predetermined nanoseconds before you say it? That's actually a biological fact, that your brain figures what you're going to say before you say it. So there is a cause right there. I can bend a pencil until it breaks to demonstrate free will. I can do the same to demonstrate causality. You cannot escape inserting a subjective interpretation regardless of what particles appear to conform to. That's subject to interpretation as well. To observe as a human is to draw arbitrary distinctions. There is no more arbitrary or less arbitrary. There is arbitrary and non-arbitrary. Arbitrary may be the goal, non-arbitrary may be the goal, but guess what, baby? It's all arbitrary between here and there. So you're saying that because everything's arbitrary, then you can't distinguish between the two. Okay, but like once you get less arbitrary, once you learn more about physics, you stop having views that free will is something that is mutually exclusive from determinism, which is what you believe, Michael, and nobody else who's educated believes this. I mean, except for Stefan Molyneux, but he has an art degree. You know, I'm actually serious here. Like, fuck his art degree. He has an art degree. He's not an expert on anything if he has an art degree. I'm sorry. I mean, if you're insulted and if you have an art degree, then by all means feel free to call me an elitist. But I'm sorry. I really am. But it's true. An art degree gives you no authority on anything. You can just like, people who have art degrees are imbeciles in my experience. I can bend a pencil until it breaks. So I'm saying, let me be absolutely clear. You cannot demonstrate free will. It is impossible. It is impossible to demonstrate free will. Show me where free will happens. And he's like, yes. Wait. I don't know if he's responding to another comment of mine at this point or not, because again, he was posting comments while I was posting comments. How is anything in a deterministic universe random? Everything must be causal to satisfy the deterministic assumption. If everything is predetermined, how is anything ever random? How can there be such random relationship? Okay. I don't like to talk about randomness within the free will determinism debate because of this exact question, Michael, because it confuses people. It confuses people who aren't educated on the subject. In a second here. Let's imagine a scale. Now, on this side here, we have 1, which represents complete determinism. Everything is predetermined. Every single action, every single variable is to 100% accuracy predetermined by preceding events. On the other side here, we have complete randomness. There is nothing is predetermined. In other words, things just happen in a vacuum. There's no determined cause to it. Now, the way science works is that once objects have a lot of mass, objects with a lot of mass tend to gravitate on this end. Objects that have very little mass gravitate towards this end. You know, more randomness. And this end is where quantum mechanics occurs. Now, so I don't know if you've heard of like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, but essentially, you know, you can't ever know the position and momentum of a particle to infinite accuracy, to perfect accuracy. In fact, the more you try to learn about either variable, the less you know about the other. In other words, that the more you try to get towards this end for one variable, the more you get towards this end for another variable. So the more you know about where a particle is, the less you know about how fast it's going. The more you know about how fast it's going, the less you know about where it is. And this is a fundamental, just purity truth of every single thing in existence. Every particle, everything is like this, including you and me. I can't actually ever know how fast you're going, or where exactly you are. Or the particles that you're comprised of. Because the particles in your body, they're oscillating, right? They're moving, they're not just standing still. And the one thing you can do is you can take a measurement, and you can, you know, before you take a measurement, an electron can occupy several places in space. Once you take a measurement, you find out where it is. But where it actually is, once you take the measurement, is completely random. It could be over here, it could be over there, it could be anywhere. It could be literally anywhere. There is no cause to where it actually ends up being. No determinism whatsoever in this case, right? It is entirely random. It doesn't make a decision. No, electrons aren't consciousnesses. They don't make decisions, right? It's just, there's no cause to it, right? It is a vacuum, just makes the decision for you. It's just, it could be anything. It's a roll of a die. Literally roll of a die. But ironically, rolling an actual die physically, I have a die right here, a dice, I don't know, a dice. Rolling this die is not an event that is random. Rolling this die is actually causal. Because, you know, if I throw this dice on my desk right now, the number that lands is predetermined. Right? It is predetermined because it's based on the weight of the dice, it's based on how I throw it, and it's based on all of the tiny little variables, the air pressure and the specific vector, the moment of inertia, all of the variables that go into determining how this thing hits the ground, what angle it hits the ground, how fast, etc. And all of that shit determines where it lands. It's pseudo-randomness. It's not true randomness. And it's the same in computers. Computers that generate random numbers aren't generating true random numbers. They are pseudo-random. They have algorithms that create pseudo-random numbers, not genuinely random numbers. The only genuine randomness exists within quantum mechanics, nowhere else. Now, another thing about reality is that I mentioned there's this, absolute causality and absolute randomness. Now, every particle, everything, can never actually touch either end. You can't have something that's purely random or purely causal. It's somewhere in the middle. It has to be somewhere in the middle all the time. The reason I don't like to talk about it is because it confuses people, right? This randomness, determinism thing, I mean, maybe this will illustrate the point, but there's no room for free will in this equation, right? Neither of these things has anything to do with free will. Right here you have randomness, so uncaused by anything, and you don't want to believe that free will is random. I mean, you could honestly say free will is just randomness, but I doubt that anyone would, right? Free will being randomness is like... first of all, it doesn't make sense with the statistics that we have about things. You would think that there's more randomness within human society, but human society demonstrates a lot of causality. Human decision-making demonstrates a lot of causality. I mean, psychology is the entire science of psychology is about studying the causality of human decisions. It's about studying human behavior, right? Anytime you're studying anything, by the way, any type of logic, you're studying the causality of a thing. And even in quantum mechanics, you are technically still trying to study the causality of electrons, even though you can't perfectly know it. There is still some causality in quantum mechanics. It's and the causality is determined by this differential equation called the Schrödinger equation. The Schrödinger equation determines where an electron could be based on this thing called the wave function. It's really complicated, and the reason I didn't want to bring it up is because it's advanced science. Like, unless you have a formal education in this stuff, you can't understand it just by me talking about it. It's like trying to explain calculus to a 12-year-old. Like, I can't do it. You need to learn it, But there's no room, right? There's no room in here for free will. Where does free will apply? Either something has a cause, or it has no cause, or you're not certain about how much of it is caused and how much of it is uncaused. Somewhere in the middle. But where is the free will element here? This is the only paradigm for judging whether events have causes or not. Because if it's free will you're talking about, you're saying it doesn't have a cause, so it can't be here. But you're saying it's not random either, so it can't be here. So where exactly is it? It must be off in its own dimension somewhere. A completely separate concept. And if it's a completely separate concept, how can you possibly suggest that it's mutually exclusive from this stuff? If it's a completely different concept, then it can't be mutually exclusive from this stuff. Because this very scale suggests the only thing that's mutually exclusive is you can't have this and this at the same time. You can't have any of these two states in between these two lines at the same time. You have to be somewhere in the middle, at one particular point in the middle. And this is the trouble that every person who doesn't agree with me on this causality thing, or who doesn't agree with, again, this is the consensus of scientists, this model. This is literally 100% agreed upon by physicists and non-physicists, and anyone who's in the STEM fields agrees on this. Anyone who's in the STEM fields will tell you about this stuff, and will tell you that this was what describes the universe. And they will probably tell you that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive concepts. I tend to say that free will doesn't exist because, and I say that more so to make a point, in that when people talk about moral decisions, they're talking about choices that are seemingly uncaused, right? The reason I say free will doesn't exist is usually it's a rhetorical technique used in an argument where people are ignoring causality. Now that's the one thing you have to always keep in mind, is you cannot ignore causality. And as it turns out, events that happen, everyday events, human decisions, everything that we more or less see and do, is more or less very close to this end right here. It's very close to this end of things. There are few quantum effects, but very few, because the scale on which quantum effects happen is so much smaller. So okay. I'm saying let's not get into randomness because it's complicated, but I just got into it right here. So you wanted my explanation of randomness. That is the makeshift explanation I can give you. That is still just brushing the surface of what randomness actually means. To know it fully, you need to read a quantum mechanics textbook. That is what you have to do. You need to read a quantum mechanics textbook to understand what it actually is. Okay, so he's saying, what does he say? Okay, so I'm like, let's not get into randomness because it's complicated, but you see, you cannot demonstrate free will. Causality, however, is demonstrable all the time. It appears to be hence that causality is everywhere and free will is nowhere to be found. Again, I'm pointing out how free will doesn't exist on this scale. It is off in its own dimension, in the dimension of morality. It does not exist in reality as a tangible, observable thing. You cannot observe something that is uncaused, that is not random, because that's what you're saying. It's like, this is not a false dichotomy. This is the dichotomy of events. They are either caused or uncaused. There's no third option, and the free will debate suggests that there is. So he says, wrong, I can't demonstrate free will. It's based on my subjective experience of a discrete event, same as everything else. I can experience free will, I can never repeat the experiment, I can never prove free will. You can't demonstrate causality, but you can never prove that the universe will play out exactly the same way multiple times. Okay, so it's based on your subjective experience of an event. Again, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it's a real thing, right? Like, it's the same way that a moral value isn't a real thing. A choice is not a real. It's not a real thing. It's an illusion. It's an illusion that you have, that your mind has, because your mind cannot fathom its own factory of decision making, right? I mean, like, how do you explain the science of decision-making? That's what I understand about this thing. How do you explain the science of decision-making if you contend that choices are not determined by anything? They are undeterministic. They are not caused. They have no causes. They have no reasons for why they happen. How do you explain the science of decision-making? How do you explain all of the algorithms that neuroscientists have tried to come up with that try and explain how the human brain makes decisions? Because that's all rationalizing it. That's making choices. Like, based on this logic, you're saying it's based on my subjective experience of a discrete event. Like, based on, what does that even mean, though? Anything is a subjective experience of a discrete event. I could have subjectively experienced God and claim that, oh yeah, God talked to me when I was praying, and now I, want to go kill 1,000 children or something. Like, what does that mean? It's the same as anything else, so everything is equally valid? I mean, if that's the standard of truth that we're going for, then fuck off, honestly. What kind of bullshit is that? You can't just say, oh, well, because I subjectively experienced it, that means it's a real thing. Sorry. So then he starts talking about time travel. You cannot go back in time and rechart the path of the aggregate molecules of a waterfall. You get only one discrete observation, no control. This does not demonstrate that things could have played out only one way. It just demonstrates that it did play out only one way. You do not hold choice and causality to the same standard. Again, choice is not well defined, so why should I hold it to the same standard? And it's complicated is a pretty insulting answer to any of my questions at this point. It's complicated tells me that randomness still means what it's always meant. We have sufficient data or models to calculate perfectly, but we are unwilling to admit that we are limited. Magic, woo-woo, no. Me saying it's complicated is me trying to be nice about saying that you're too ignorant to have this discussion with, and I'm sorry, Michael, but that is literally the case. Like, me saying it's complicated is me saying that there is this entire vast amount of knowledge that is relevant to this discussion, that if you knew this vast amount of knowledge, we would have a totally different discussion, you and I, here. We would be able to get along very quickly if you knew this. But I can't explain all this to you, so don't expect me to, right? This is, like, give me a sec. Like, you should read a book like this on this topic. This is a massive book. I mean, you could skim certain parts of it, but this book is a first-year undergraduate textbook. And it has stuff on everything. Hold on, let me find... Where the heck is the table of contents? Table of contents. Okay. Newton's laws, conservation laws, applications of Newtonian mechanics, thermodynamics, waves and optics, electricity, relativity, and quantum mechanics, and quantum physics. So the last section, relativity and quantum physics, will teach you all about randomness. And the first section about Newton's laws will teach you all about Newton's laws. And the first section is what will teach you that all particles operate under Newton's laws. Now, here's the thing that you said here that I don't agree with. What you said is, I'm not holding causality to the same standard. You cannot go back in time and rechart the path of the aggregate molecules of a waterfall. See, okay, this is kind of like the argument that people erroneously make against sometimes. It's like, well, you know, physics only describes very simple systems. It describes systems of 3 particles or less. Like Newtonian mechanics describes systems of 3 particles or less. But there's no reason to assume, well, that's not always true. In Newtonian laws still work, they're just applied a little differently. Again, it's complicated. I'm sorry if you're offended by that, but it's literally complicated. I mean, I'm not going to explain all of physics to you here. But because, like, chemistry usually is something that operates with hundreds, thousands of millions of particles during a chemical interaction. And the laws of chemistry describe the interactions. But the laws of physics are still in play. But here's the thing, we don't actually know for sure that the laws of physics are in play. And that's sort of the argument you're making, is you're saying we're not sure about what laws of what's actually in play. We're not sure about the exact interactions that take place within the chemical reaction on a physical level, on a, you know, a very Newtonian level. But we do know that they are at work, because why wouldn't they be at work? Because of homogeneity of space-time. The laws of physics don't change throughout time and space. You know, once you add more particles, the laws of physics don't suddenly change. It's never been observed to change, so it's taken as an assumption, as an axiom, that it never does change. Now, if you have a big problem with that axiom, then your problem, that's fair. But that has nothing to do with free will and determinism, right? Then you have a problem with inductive logic. This is a principle of inductive logic. This is something Hume was talking about forever when he was criticizing the scientific method. How scientists assume a lot of things, and yes, they do assume a lot of things, but their assumptions are confirmed by observations. So, I mean, you're saying that you can't go back and rechart paths, so you don't know for sure that the aggregate molecules of waterfall couldn't have worked another way. Okay, well, see, they could have worked another way if you, because of quantum mechanical effects. But that's not making a choice. Don't you see the problem here? Is that even if they worked one way, or if there's a million different ways they could have worked, neither option leaves any room for choice. Like, the reason I wasn't holding causality to the same standard as you say is because I didn't want to get into quantum randomness. Because the truth is, that's too complicated for this discussion. But you can't say that, you get only one discrete observation and no control. How does this invalidate determinism is what I'm trying to figure out, right? Let's assume all the particles are totally deterministic in the way they work. Let's say that the laws of physics that describe the way one particle moves and the way 2 particles move and the way 3 particles move, etc., are totally deterministic, that determine everything. You know, as t goes to infinity, they determine everything. Then what makes you think that all of the molecules in a waterfall, like a billion molecules or more, then suddenly determinism doesn't work? Because we know for a fact that it works in the simple case with a few particles. I mean, if you're saying that it could have worked out another way, what you're saying is that you don't agree with Newtonian physics. So then your problem is with Newtonian physics, not with causality. Again, you keep making the same mistake. You're saying we don't know, we can't rechart the path of every particle, but that doesn't mean that the particles could have gone another way, or couldn't have gone another, sorry, that doesn't mean that the particles couldn't have gone another way. Just because we don't know every exact path that they took, doesn't mean that we don't know that they were determined to take that particular path. Because we know for a fact that if a law of physics was what motivated their motion, then they were determined to take that particular path, as there could not have been any other path that they would have taken. Again, if I have one particle and I have a law of physics that affects its motion, it's only going to take one path. So when you increase the number, how does that suddenly change? You don't need to have perfect control of the experiment to know about causality. Because what you're suggesting is, even if there is somehow a way for the particles to have gone, like, you don't have to know what the path is to know that there's a path. That is the major point here. In fact, there's a whole thing in like Lagrangian mechanics that it doesn't even matter what the path is. The only thing that matters is the end point. But that doesn't mean that there were multiple paths or that there was one path. It doesn't mean that there were multiple paths. Just because you don't know what the one path was does not mean that there wasn't one path. In fact, you have two options. You either have that there were two paths, three paths, infinitely many paths, or there was just one path. And within Newtonian physics, the one path is the only provable option. You cannot prove more than that. You cannot prove that there were multiple paths. Right? Via the laws of physics, via the Newtonian physics, if you saw a fountain or a waterfall or something, then you know for a fact that one path was taken within Newtonian physics. Within quantum mechanics, that's not the case, but that's quantum mechanics, right? And then randomness is in play, in which case I go all the way back to what I said about randomness, in which case free will still isn't an issue, right? But in the issue about, you are totally wrong when you're saying that I am not applying the standard for, that I'm not applying this rigorous standard towards determinism. I am. Determinism is simply the only possible concept that could be there, again, within Newtonian physics. Because multiple paths are not possible. Therefore, there can only be one path. You don't know what that path is, and you can't write the path down, and you can't prove what the path was on paper because it's too damn complicated to find out what the path was for an aggregate of molecules in a waterfall. But you can't possibly have it that there were multiple paths, because multiple paths suggest that there's some kind of random element in how the particles and the conservation laws interact. And there is no random element because it's Newtonian physics and not quantum mechanics. If it's quantum mechanics, there were multiple paths. But again, that still doesn't prove free will. So what the fuck are you talking about? So okay, at this point I'm like, okay, go ahead, demonstrate it for me. Everything requires a cause. Demonstrating free will implies you can give me an event that has no cause. Good luck. I'm like, demonstrate it for me. And then he says, you do not ever get to send the same photon through the same slit at the same point in time, 2 different times under exactly the same conditions to compare the results. Can never happen. You are good at recognizing the fallacies around free will and completely unable to and evenly apply the same rational standards to determinism. I don't have to apply the same standards to free will. It is a different concept. It's a moral concept. Applying scientific standards to it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Once you apply scientific standards to what you perceive as free will, it becomes determinism. That's my point. Once you pick a choice that a human being makes, like I choose to murder you, once you start applying scientific standards to that, which are the standards that I'm applying, once you apply scientific standards to that and try to ask the question, well, why did this person make that choice? You realize that it's deterministic. It stops being free will, don't you see? Once you apply the same standard to it. You don't ever get to send the same photon through the same slit. Why do you, again, you don't have to do that. That's an insane standard, first of all. Because what you're saying is that nothing is perfectly repeatable within science. But, so again, you're challenging inductive logic then. Inductive logic says that if you repeat an experiment enough times, you can basically, and it yields the same results, you can take those results as a law of physics, as a given. That's what inductive logic, that's one of the consequences of inductive logic. Your problem is with that, not with determinism. Just the fact that I can't repeat every experiment doesn't mean that the predictions of that experiment or the standards of that experiment are wrong. Because by that logic, all of science is wrong. Because all of science does this. No experiment of science is perfectly reproduced always. Every single experiment is different, in a different lab, under different conditions, at a different point in time, run by different people. And they produce similar results. And then they form a law of physics because of those results. But not a single experiment, because to them, the experiments are similar enough and the conditions are similar enough that they concede, you know what, the conditions were similar enough, this probably describes a physical law. right? But you don't have to perfectly. See, here's the thing. If you could perfectly replicate the original experiment, like it occurred at the same time by the same people, then it would literally be the same experiment and would literally yield the same results, because it's the same. You can't prove that. You don't need to prove that either. It's like that by definition. You're saying you can't ever repeat the experiment perfectly. But repeating the experiment perfectly is just the past happens again, in which case it's still the same thing. You cannot suffer a paradox or you rationalize it away. I'm not suffering the paradox because I'm not defining free will the way you are. Believe me, I can suffer paradoxes. You do not know mathematics if you don't think I can suffer paradoxes, okay? I took a graduate level course on measure theory. A ton of paradoxes and that stuff. Tons of paradoxes arise from the axiom of choice. Heck, quantum mechanics itself is a giant paradox, or there's like paradoxes in quantum logic, and there's paradoxes in frickin' Banach-Tarski and all this crap because of the axiom of choice. Do not tell me that I can't suffer paradoxes, sir. That is false. Okay, so here I say, okay, stop making separate comments. Just post one long one as this makes this hard to follow. I was telling him to stop posting long comments. I'm almost done here, by the way, folks. So sorry for having forced you to suffer through this, I guess. Although I think if you watch this far, you're probably entertained. The flaws of causality. Oh yeah, the flaws of causality amount to flaws in inductive logic. So I'm commenting on what he said, which is an entirely different debate. Flaws of free will are that it can't even be demonstrated. Please try to demonstrate it if you think it's possible. Give me a concrete example of where you witnessed free will in play. Yeah, so the flaws of causality that I was talking about, these are flaws in inductive logic. Flaws of free will are so much worse than this. Flaws of free will are that it literally can't exist as a concept, because anytime you try to apply the same standards that you apply to causality, it stops being free will, it becomes causality. I can demonstrate, you just can't verify it without time travel. If we had time travel, you could put two jars in... Okay, this is him, by the way, and this is the stupidest thought experiment I've ever seen. No offense, Michael, but it really is, and I'm going to explain why. I can demonstrate, you just can't verify it without time travel. If we had time travel, you could put two jars in front of me and tell me you have already performed this experiment. You have already chosen a jar under the exact same conditions and instructions at this exact time. At this exact same time. Now choose a different jar. Record which one I choose. Then travel back in time, repeat the experiment. After repeating the experiment, if I am unable to choose different jars, then free will is proven and determinism is disproved. If after a certain number of experiments, depends on your confidence, if I continue to choose the same jar, then free will is disproved and determinism is proven. I cannot think of a valid test without time travel. Okay, so time travel isn't even well defined. But he describes this thought experiment in more detail in a few comments, and it really... Okay, in like 2 comments. So I'm saying... So my response to this is, if I tell you you already chose it, then it's not the same conditions. I changed the conditions by telling you about them. In any case, it doesn't matter. The first time you choose jar A, the second time you choose jar B, then it's an example of quantum randomness, not free will. Again, if you choose A first time, B second time, then it's random. So then this is what he says. Pay attention to this, folks. In this experiment, if I am told what my choices was, I will demonstrate choice by choosing the opposite jar, and the results will take the form of jar A, jar B, A, B, A, B, A, B, der infinity. Oh dear God. So I have to record the experiment, then go back in time and tell you what your choice was the first time? So first of all, that doesn't even make sense, because that violates causality. I know I've like assumed causality, but that doesn't make any sense. Like, what, wouldn't I meet my past self? How many of my past selves are in this thing? You can't change the past. So this thought experiment doesn't make any sense. Not once you consider causality. If causality is in fact the way the universe works, then this thought experiment isn't even possible. But second of all, this is literally retarded. Let's say I go back into... I'm actually going to end the video in like a few minutes here, but if I go back in time and tell you what you chose the first time, then that is not a choice that you made. That is me influencing you, right? There is a cause, right? You are now choosing, if you chose A the first time, and then I tell you, well, And then I tell you, well, Michael, you chose A the first time, you're going to choose B. But you're only choosing B to try and prove me wrong, so there is a cause there, right? It's not causeless, it's not reasonless, right? Determinism just means there's a cause and effect. The effect was, I told you what your choice was, and this caused you to make another choice. Do you not see the cause and effect here? Here's the problem, Michael. If you try to apply the same standards that you have for determinism, scientific standards, if you try to apply them towards free will, you get that free will is determinism. Okay, it's like there's three concepts. Again, remember, there's determinism, randomness, and free will. Right? And free will, the only thing we know about free will is that it is neither of these two. It is not causality, and it is not randomness either. But that doesn't make any sense, because once you look at a choice and deconstruct it, it falls into this dichotomy, or somewhere in the middle, right? It becomes a choice, or it becomes randomness. If the experiment is simply repeated and you choose A, B, then that's an example of randomness. And that means that maybe there's quantum randomness taking place in the human brain. If you choose the same thing over and over, then that's causality. If I go back in time and tell you, then that's also causality. In fact, you assumed that causality wasn't a thing just in constructing that experiment, because you assumed that we could have a situation where causality isn't taking place, because that would have to be the case for me to go back in time and change the past, right? Because in this timeline, we have the experiment, then I go back in time and create a new timeline, right? But you assume that causality isn't always in effect just in constructing that experiment. And I'm saying you can't even do that. Because in doing anything, you implicitly create causal restrictions on things. The only reason you choose the opposite jar is because I told you which one you chose the first time. Okay? I'm making the choice for you, literally. I could lie to you, for fuck's sake, and have you choose the opposite jar, and that would still be an example of causality. For God's sakes. And then at this point, we basically ended. I told him to go talk to me on Skype, because this is too much bullshit. This 200 comments. 200 comments. There's too many. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. And Michael, if you want to talk about this, for fuck's sakes, Skype me or watch this, and don't bother commenting about this stuff, because I'm not going to respond. It's not going to get anywhere. Cheers.